All right, good morning. Let's get started. So I hope that you have been having a good week so far. You should have seen that your grades are up on your reflection assignment. Canvas has been acting weird and that's had outages. So you should see a comment up, although not all the comments saved. So right after class, I'm just going to double check and make sure that all of them are up. So if you don't see a comment, it's just because Canvas hasn't been working and getting them submitted properly. So I'll try to make sure they're all up by the end of class. And if you're still not seeing your comment by the end of the day today, send me an email and let me know, and I'm happy to talk about that reflection assignment, why you received the grade that you did, and also to help you with preparing for your next assignment. As a reminder, for your group membership assignment, I'm happy to look at rough drafts, outlines, anything else, just so long as you send them to me by the end of the day on Friday, so that I have enough time to turn that back around to you.
Is there a rubric we'll be able to see for the?
Yes, so the rubric is just on the second page of that assignment, just like the last one.
My rubric hasn't popped up.
I'll show you real quick. You go on Canvas, or
I know the second page is like perfect, it's just there's nothing there. So I have a grade and comments with it.
oh, I see, for the reflection assignment. Yes, I will try to send that out to you. That just pop up. Thanks for letting me know, Haley. So yes, so do let me know if you're running into issues with that. Thankfully, things have been getting a little bit better. COVID cases do seem like they're going down. You know, we're still kind of doing our best to hang on for the time being. So we'll keep doing what we're doing, and if there end up being changes at the state or university level, then we'll do those. So get started for today. Since we're around halfway through the quarter, one thing that I like to do is just to give you the opportunity to provide some feedback, of course, and how things are going so far. So if you look on Canvas, on the front page of Canvas, you'll see that there's a space to submit for an anonymous feedback form. So if you go on the front page right here at the very top, you'll see there's this feedback form. Again, it's anonymous. It just asks you to fill in a couple things. So if you are able to access that through a phone, through a laptop, or anything like that, go ahead and pull that up. If you're not able to access it through a device, then you're welcome to write, but don't put your name on it. Just keep things anonymous. And what I want you to do is just, if you're writing it, to just note 2 things that have been going well for you in the course, and then 2 things that I can do to better support you. Again, I like to do this because while you get evals at the end of the quarter that sort of let you speak to feedback about the class, I like to do this because there are things that I can do that are going well or that I can change. Then I can already integrate that and make some adjustments in the remaining half. So I'll give you some time to look through that and to work through that in the first 10 minutes or so of class. also on the front page of the course on campus, so you should see a link. Yeah. Looks like a lot of people are close to finishing up, so we'll give you a couple minutes. For those of you still working, if you don't finish, you're welcome to submit later. Okay, so it looks like folks are about done. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Again, the feedback form is totally anonymous, but it's a really helpful way for me again to know what's going well, what I can continue to do, and then what adjustments I'll make. So I'll look at this feedback form after class for today, and then on Friday, I'll let you know about adjustments and changes that I'll be making at that point. Again, I know this is a challenging time with COVID and with going into a new year, and I know a lot of people just have a lot going on, and so I do want to do what I can to help this course continue to go smoothly for you. So as we get started for today, I just wanted to do a quick recap last class. So last class we started talking about group meetings, right? This idea that when we participate in groups, it can oftentimes feel really annoying or frustrating. Sometimes we're stuck in meetings that go for hours and hours and hours, or feel aimless, or we're in meetings that could have just been emails, right? So that can be a challenge for us, is feeling like we're able to participate and really work well in a meeting together. So we talked about some of the ways that a meeting can go well through the use of a clear agenda, right? An agenda being a written list that's sent out in advance of what's going to happen in the meeting, and to invite people to contribute or work on that agenda. So if you have a work group, right, or activity that you're involved in, a lot of people wrote about their work groups for their reflection assignment. You might think about how ahead of a meeting, you can come in with a plan of attack and things that you aim to tackle. As a reminder, again, on Friday, you can turn in a rough draft or outline. This next assignment again is due on Sunday. Happy to help you out if you need additional assistance. Again, I'm available right after class or office hours if you need some additional help. We talked about how meetings and groups are not an end of themselves, right? We don't participate in the group for the sake of them holding meetings. We participate in group meetings because they help us to achieve our goals, right? To make decisions on issues like trying to decide how to allocate hours or shifts for a work group, or building things like synergy, working together and developing solutions that you don't necessarily get when you're on your own. So again, meeting can give those benefits and definitely is worth doing if that's better than the alternative. I'm not going to go over all of these since we discussed them last class, but remember that preparing for a meeting is a really big chunk of what we do. It's the idea that we have to make sure that the meeting is organized, that you're able to let people know if you can't make it, that you just create an opportunity to listen and to engage and not to repeat what's already been said in meetings. And, right, if you find yourself in a role where you're hosting a meeting, like you're a boss or a supervisor or a team leader, right, there's a lot of things that you can do to help make those meetings go well, including the use of things like an agenda that clearly lays out what you intend to cover in that meeting. So what I want to do now is to talk about what it means to facilitate the group meeting. So we'll be spending some time today going over practices as to what it looks like to have a meeting facilitated well, and what you can do to make that meeting space work effectively. So I'm going to give a lot of tips about how you can manage your meetings in a good way. Again, you might not feel like this is like directly applicable or helpful to you in the moment, but I think we all find ourselves having to organize and work on meetings at some point in our lives. So I think it's a good set of skills to be building. When it comes to facilitating, right, or managing the meeting when we find ourselves in groups, we can break it up into 3 different parts. And each of these 3 different parts is pretty equally important, right? The first one being preparing for a meeting. So we've talked a little bit about this already, but it deals with the idea of creating an agenda, of coming in early, of making sure that the physical environment or space or virtual space, right, is one that works well. It means sending out a Zoom invite to everybody if it's happening through Zoom, or it means making sure that the room is reserved and capable of everybody to participate if it's happening face-to-face. So that's a really big part of what we do, right, is making sure that in advance a meeting is ready to go. Running the meeting, like physically doing the meeting and making sure the meeting itself goes smoothly, is another big part, right? Making sure people have the time to listen, making sure the meeting runs on time, making sure all of the agenda items and things within the meeting are covered. That's really important. And then lastly, the other third is this idea of meeting follow-up. And this is something that we don't do very much or think about a whole lot, because oftentimes we're eager to get out or be done with the meeting, where we see a meeting and we see things happen and we say, okay, it's over. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But meeting follow-up can be crucial, right? For a few reasons. First of all, using something like meeting minutes or tracking what's happened in the meeting can be a great great way to ensure that you just have that locked in. You know what happened, you can refer back to it, and you can avoid a he said, she said situation because people agree as to what was said and done during the meeting through the use of things like this. Another great way that meeting follow-up works is that it helps set the stage for the next meeting or the next time that people are working together. For instance, maybe you get through a few items in your agenda, but you still haven't figured out how to create a poster for your activity on campus. Maybe that's something you can follow up with and use to set up your next meeting. One thing that can really help with making your meetings go well, right, or working together as a group, is that by the end of it, you've set out clear expectations about what people are expected to do between meetings. Maybe you have people volunteer and say, okay, I'll try to figure out how to make this poster. So meeting follow-up is definitely really important and can make life a lot easier as you head into the next meeting. Because if you have people who say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do this as you get into a meeting, that can be a big challenge. One easy way to do this is if you're ever a host, right, or a person that's running a meeting, you can send a follow-up email and say, hey, I really enjoyed the things that we discussed today. We had a good meeting. Here are the things that you should take away or work on going forward. This can be great if you have people who weren't able to come to the meeting too, to just do a quick recap of what happened. So, again, a lot of you brought up last class the times that you've been in not so great meetings. And some of the things that came up as you all shared included the idea that meetings got on focus, they got on task, there wasn't a clear agenda, things felt pointless, people were talking over each other and making it about each other's egos rather than content, right? A lot of those types of problems are examples of meetings that are poorly facilitated. So I want to make a few different points here about what makes for bad meetings and some of the red flags you might find as you're participating in a meeting that you can try to address, right? Or even ways for you to reflect on your own participation and some of the bad habits that you do, right? I do some of these too. One of the biggest ones is an argument about established facts. So this can be a problem. Obviously, we've had a lot of debate and challenging discussion in recent years about what counts as facts, right? Or where we get our sources, or how we determine if sources are credible, and what some people believe to be an established fact and others don't, right? So there's a lot of trouble with misinformation and accuracy. There's a lot of ways that you can try to reduce it. One of the biggest ways, right, is to reference or source back to what it is that you're citing or talking about. When you say, well, we know that our profits are going down because there's this report that says that they went down by 25% in the last quarter, right? Evidence is the tiebreaker. So having good, credible sources to back up controversial points that you make is a good idea. One thing you can do, right, is link things if you're using a chat, for instance, through Canvas. That can be a really big help, right, to help people understand and follow along. One other thing you can do as you're starting or facilitating a meeting is to start by explaining some of the facts or established things that you know. Our profits have gone down by 25%. Here's this report. That way, it's a commonplace or starting point for your discussion, where when you get into some of the more challenging material, you know that you're in agreement. If people don't agree about the facts and about crucial information, you're going to have a rough meeting because people are not going to be starting from the same place. Opinions introduced as truth is a really big one, right? There's a distinction between what's true and what's true to you, or what feels true to you, right? So, for instance, if somebody says, oh, yeah, well, I got a lot of customers today during my shift, so clearly our profits must be going up. That's an example of a logical fallacy, or hasty generalization, known as a hasty G, which is kind of silly. Hasty generalization where you take this observation that you had a busy day at work, you got a bunch of customers, therefore profits must be going up, even though if you look at the overall trends of your organization, that's not the case. So be careful about the way that you bring in your own experience and generalize it into what you think is true overall, right? Intimidation with knowledge. So this can be an especially challenging issue if you're a new member of the group. Say you've recently joined a club or activity like volleyball or football team, and you have somebody who's a senior member of the team that says, "Oh, I've been to so many games. I've been on the team for a while. I know so much more than you do. You know, don't participate in the meeting. Don't say anything." Well, it's important to acknowledge that maybe you don't have the same experience or power or influence that somebody else does. You can still bring some good ideas to the table. Maybe you were really successful on a high school team. You have some insight that you want to bring in. So intimidating other people, right, or using your own experience as a way to prevent other people from sharing their ideas can be a challenge. It can create things like groupthink, and it can create an environment in which people don't feel like they can openly share their points of view. One tactic that can be used is overwhelming people with proposals. So it's useful. Maybe you're working for a business and you're proposing an idea for a new menu. And you say, customers will really like this new menu. I think it'd be great. That's okay. But if you start proposing like a ton of changes all at once, and your intention is not to make a good new menu, but instead to overload the meeting with information and to cover way more ground than you would be able to in the meeting, that's a bad practice, right? As a person in a group, you need to be conscientious of the amount of time that's available for your group to work together. You're not going to create a ton of agenda items that can't be met and distract from what you are able to do because you get so mired in all of these proposals and actions that you just can't act on, right? That's actually a tactic that we see happen in US Congress sometimes, where a bunch of legislation gets proposed and it's not ever going to pass or happen, but it just gets overloaded so that other tasks don't end up occurring. Getting angry for no reason. So one challenge, right, is avoiding things like projection. For instance, if you're in a bad mood, maybe you didn't get enough sleep, maybe your alarm didn't go off on time, you're feeling stressed, maybe you've had things happen in your family that aren't great, right? It can be difficult to disentangle that from being involved in a group and working professionally. So get frustrated or share too much information with no context that can oftentimes really derail the group. There's an idea in psychology called fundamental attribution error. It's the idea that we oftentimes will think that somebody is mad at us specifically, or we think that this is somebody's personality when they're just having a bad day or they're in a bad mood, or there's something causing their bad mood that isn't us, right? We tend to personally think that it's about us if somebody's overall in a bad mood. So bringing too much of that into a group, if you're feeling off, can definitely hurt the cohesion of the group and destroy trust. So continue to work on trying to compartmentalize when you can. My way or the highlight, right, is one way of thinking about another issue. It's where when you're participating in a group, you say, you know what, we have to do it this way. We have to accept my plan. We have to do my proposal or else, or there's nothing that we can do. This kind of binary way of thinking, this or that, black or white, oftentimes means that there might be other options or proposals that we can do, but we need to compromise and give in and give people the opportunity to work together on other solutions. Maybe there is a compromise or collaboration we can do, but if you dig your heels in and demand one thing, rather than giving yourself the chance to give in when it makes sense to, that can really hurt the overall group. So while it's important to get information and be able to understand how a group can arrive at a decision through that information, don't ask for more information that you need, especially if you're asking for information you just cannot be given. For instance, maybe you say, well, we can't just make this decision based on our profits last quarter. We need it for the past 10 years, when you know that that information isn't available or hasn't been archived, right? If you find yourself asking for so much information before you can arrive at a decision, that can oftentimes be used as a stalling tactic, where somebody doesn't actually want the information to help them. They want the information so that it'll take forever to get it, so it'll take forever for something to happen. So that can be a problem. Another issue, right, is this idea of circular circular reasoning. So circular reasoning or tautological reasoning is a problem that can happen in groups, especially with issues related to grouping. And again, it kind of goes in a circle. A then B, if B then A. For instance, logic is great because it involves logical thinking. Therefore, you should use logic as an example of circular reasoning, where it doesn't really justify itself because it says the reason you should use logic is because logic is good, right? It goes round and around. For instance, my boss is a great boss. They're really good to work with. They're a good person. Therefore, they're a good boss, right? That's an example of using language that's circular. So one thing to be careful about is when your group is reaching a decision, what is the reason? What is the support for that decision? If you're deciding to expand your menu, it isn't just that a new menu is interesting or it's new, it's that a new menu might reach new customers or might be able to save on costs or something like that, right? So try to give some grounded rationale or explanation for the changes that you're proposing. So what I want to do now is talk about some of the ways that you can use good facilitation in groups. Again, these are just some tips that you can incorporate, whether you're hosting or just participating in a group. And in a little bit, I'm going to have you do an activity that will involve applying and using some of these tactics. There's a lot of different things that you can do. One of the biggest things, of course, is starting on time. If you're running late or you're not having your tech working on time, that is definitely going to cut into what you're able to accomplish. And it's going to make people feel frustrated. If you seem unprepared or not a good leader, then that's going to really hurt the group. So one thing that I think works really well is to start with something positive. Oftentimes, participating in a group meeting, like you all have brought up last class, can be a really frustrating and draining experience. We can feel like nothing is happening, people are angry and irritated with each other. But if you start with something good, that can be a really good way to set the tone for the meeting. For instance, you might say, to start our meeting, we have some great news. Our friend Greg here just found out that he got accepted for an internship. Hooray for Greg, right? That's a great way to get people thinking more positively about the group and also to get yourself in a more constructive position with things to get. Another thing to work on is housekeeping, right? So we'll talk about this in a minute, but quick wins or things that are pretty easy to resolve are great things to do from the get-go. By housekeeping, I mean really basic and simple tasks. So one of the first things that you could do in something like a meeting is approve the minutes or the notes from a previous meeting. So that can be an easy way to use housekeeping to organize and just get that stuff out of the way so that you have more time and attention to dedicate to the really big issues or topics of discussion. So if we push back some of the housekeeping or important stuff, then oftentimes we lose out on really important things that the group needs to do. Defining rules. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the roles and things that group members can do on Friday. But one thing that should be clear if you're a part of a group is how people should be contributing and what they should do. For instance, maybe you're in a group on Zoom where you are requiring people to have their video on the whole time. That could be one choice you make about people's roles and the way that they participate within groups, right? I'm not a fan of requiring video on because I think that reinforces socioeconomic disparities and is probably not a very good or fair thing to ask people to display if they're not feeling up for it. But defining the roles and the things that people will do as they participate in a group is important. Another thing that's an important idea is to keep an agenda, right? So it's not enough to say, here's our agenda, here's the things we need to do in the meeting. You got to enforce it because there's a good chance people are going to go on tangents and go off task during the meeting. There's a couple ways that you can do this. One thing to do is to assign somebody who occupies what the book calls a sheriff, but could also think about as the sort of like rule guru, rules are type person who really monitors and says, hey, this seems a little off topic, let's go back on track. So part of assigning roles, right, you could put somebody who maybe is the no-nonsense person in your group in that type of role where they're asked to keep people on task and keep people focused. Another thing that actually works really well as a strategy is somebody who signposts and keeps track of time. For instance, you could assign somebody in your group or take on the role in your group yourself of saying, okay, we have 30 minutes left. Okay, we have 15 minutes left, right? Whenever I ask you to work like on a prompt, I'll typically give you a reminder that, hey, you have a couple minutes left or 5 minutes left or something like that, right? That can really help groups work together because if time feels nebulous and people have not kept track of time, then they're more likely to get off task. If they know, okay, they only have 20 minutes left to work on this thing, they're going to be more likely to do it. Guiding, right? Instead of asking people to dictate or dictating what people should do, instead of taking this my way or the highway approach with one solution to the problem, you can say, hey, we're dealing with this issue, our profits are going down. What are some of the actions or options that we can do to address this? So helping to guide people along the action items or the things that your meeting is doing is a good approach. One challenge that we find ourselves in when we're in groups is oftentimes there's like the one or the two people in the group that talk and dominate the discussion. While it's good to have a lot of people involved, we do want to avoid one person occupying too much time or space. One kind of useful way to think about this is the NOT-SO acronym, which means that nobody speaks twice until everybody speaks once. That's a really good way to address those types of issues when you have group meetings, because it means that you give people the opportunity to get everybody's voice heard. If you've heard of like the talking stick, or maybe there's something like a ball that you throw to people where you can only talk when you are holding the stick or you're holding the ball, right? That's another tactic that people can use to try to encourage people to speak. So measures that you can take that prevent a single person from dominating the discussion can be useful. And then another idea that can really help is the idea of stacking, where you might have people raise their hand. And if they raise their hand, they get added to a list, and then you go down the list in order of people speaking. Have people raise their hand up to add to the list, or you can have people like have their hands down as a way of telling them that they want to reply to an existing point. So that can be a good way to prevent too much domineering over the course of a group discussion. And then another key idea is what's known as a perception check. So when you're working in a group, oftentimes you find that there's a lot of nonverbal communication that happens. Sometimes people are rolling their eyes, they seem unfocused. Sometimes people are trying to be sarcastic, but it's a little bit difficult to tell from their tone of voice if they're being sarcastic. This is a much bigger problem on things like Zoom, right? Where you might not see a person's face, or if they do have video on, it's in a smaller, flat, two-dimensional space. So given that, it's a good idea to check in with the person if a message is unclear or ambiguous, right? Nonverbal communication is oftentimes a lot less clear. So for instance, you seem like you were being a little bit unsure of this, or you seem a little sarcastic. Were you being sincere, or were you being sarcastic at this point? It can feel a little awkward to ask something like that, I know, but it can be a good way to just make sure that everybody understands what's happening in the meeting. Obviously, as a group member, you want to make sure your communication is as clear as possible, but if not, a perception check is a good way to just make sure that everybody is understanding. This is especially a good idea when you think about culture, right? People come from different backgrounds, and sometimes certain messages might get lost in translation or lost depending on the culture. So clear communication helps. There's some other things that I think are good tactics to do, and I want to go over them real quick before I have us do an activity that applies some of these things. Assigning, right, and really resolving action items is pretty straightforward. Figure out a plan. If you're working for a challenge or problem, delegating and saying, okay, we'll have this group of 3 work on this issue, this group of 3 work on this issue, then we'll come together in 10 minutes. It'll be good. Make things fun, right? Or make things healthy. So So one group that I was a part of asked us to think of a word that described what we were hoping to do over the course of the year. And it was a fun way for us to share and get to know each other better. Think about a word that was really important for us. It's a nice way for us to think about making a group more interesting, right? Talking about a weekend, sharing a fun fact, that type of thing can be a good way to get things started. Sarcasm or cynicism, right? So if you've ever watched The Office, right, there's a lot of examples of people who are cynical, who are using sarcasm, or being silly, but oftentimes being sarcastic both means that the message might not be understood by everybody, but can also just bring down the group. So try to avoid it when you can. So mentioned before, the idea of a quick win is a really good point to use when you're participating in a group. So if you're organizing a meeting or creating an agenda, one really easy way to do it is to start with the easiest things first. These are the tasks that we can just knock out and get them done. That builds momentum, right? It's, again, this idea of inertia. Objects at rest stay at rest, objects in motion stay in motion. If you can get that momentum going, you can get things moving, build good synergy and relationships to help the group member work through more difficult tasks. They know how to communicate with each other better, they know how to solve problems better, and that helps them as they're working through more difficult things. Again, breaks are a good idea. People are not going to work together well if you're forcing them in a room for an hour and a half and you don't let them go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or anything like that. Obviously, respect matters a lot. Be respectful, be supportive, create an environment in which people feel like they can constructively work together. Expecting the unexpected, being prepared for things to take a turn or not go the way that you hope for them to go. Maybe the fire alarm goes off in the very middle of your group discussion. That's okay, right? Be adaptable to those situations. Multiple assessments, right? So assessments is a way to check in about the group. Maybe you ask the group to say, hey, how is our communication going? How are we working together? Are things going well? For instance, you can do a tactic like hovering, where you have like smaller groups and you check in with those groups and see how those groups are doing. And then just to think, plan and talk ahead, right? To talk about what you hope to do in the next meeting. Doing like a quick recap at the end of the meeting that also previews and says, okay, next week we're going to talk about this, is a good way to help people feel prepared and ready to go. I know this is like a lot of items and not the most exciting thing in the world, but I do think that getting a good grasp of some of these ideas really help us feel like our group experiences go a lot better. So here's what I want to do. First, to talk a little bit about virtual facilitation, and then using these skills, we're going to do kind of an opportunity to brainstorm what facilitation might be. The last thing I want to get to is the idea of facilitating a meeting that happens through something like Zoom, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, and so on, right? A lot of us don't like Zoom, myself included. It can be obnoxious and feel like you're not necessarily communicating in the same way. One tip is if you're ever hosting or involved in a virtual meeting, is to get everybody to say something or offer something to the conversation. This is good because it lets people make sure that they've got their audio and stuff working correctly. So let's start by having everybody go around, tell us their name, tell us something that they did over the weekend. It can be a good way to make virtual meetings start effectively. You don't want to get halfway through a meeting and discover that somebody's microphone isn't working. If they realize it isn't working early on, they can fix it for later. Remind people, right, of the meeting's purpose, goals, and so on. As we talked about, if somebody is in a meeting virtually, they're less likely to be engaged, they're more likely to be multitasking. So those types of reminders, reinforcement, can help group members work together better. Ask for insight. If people are not participating in a group, not contributing to the discussion, you might cold call, right? Call somebody in the group to participate or share a perspective, make sure that they're there, right? Summarize the meeting. Again, people might be drifting in and out, they might be multitasking, they might be using the restroom. So you just want to make sure to reiterate, okay, we're not halfway through the meeting, we've gotten through these 2 agenda items, we still need to work on this. One thing you should discourage, right, is people to call in or to use something like a cell phone if it doesn't have a good connection or reception. Also, right, discourage people from doing things like getting into meetings at times where it's not safe. So for instance, you know, if you are like driving through heavy traffic in the middle of the rain, probably not a good time to have somebody jump in on a meeting. Clarifying your intentions. So for instance, if somebody is trying to say, you know, I'm trying to be sarcastic here, right? Clarifying that because some of the nonverbal cues are missing can be a good thing to do. For instance, if somebody is reacting to what somebody has said and is frustrated, that might not come across in a little Zoom box. So you might respond by saying, I disagree, or I'm a little frustrated by this point. Let me explain why. And then let people know in advance if you need to leave. One good way to do that is through something like a chat, right? So those are some of the tips that your text talks about. A couple more that I would add. One of them is to use something like a group chat whenever you can. Oftentimes, like checking the chat is great because people might directly message you or message the group who have some questions or concerns. And especially if things like audio aren't working, that's a great way to get people engaged and able to participate. Also to record a meeting, right? Let people know meetings being recorded and then have the recording up later. That way people who can't access it during the meeting itself are able to watch it later and see what happened. So again, if you find yourself doing a meeting that happens virtually, I think those things will really help that meeting go a lot more smoothly. So I want you to work on this scenario on your own. And this scenario asks you to think about and apply some of the things we talked about so far. Again, I know having a good meeting is not the most exciting thing in the world to talk about, but I do think it's a useful set of skills to think about. So I'll let you choose, but there's a collaborative activity on Canvas, and you're hosting, facilitating a meeting among members of that club or organization. What I want you to do is talk about some of the bad habits of group meeting facilitation. So what would you do to avoid some of those bad things from happening at a group? Secondarily, I want you to think about what some of the good practices of group facilitation are. So if you were hosting this meeting, again, working with this club or group, what would you do to make that meeting go smoothly? And then lastly, if this meeting happened virtually, what would be some things you could do to make that meeting go well? So I want you to think about, in the context of the club or activity you've selected, applying and making sure that those ideas we've talked about good meetings could directly link. So I'll give you some time to work on that. You should write or type with your name for your attendance credit for the day. we'll let you continue to work on this for about 2 or 3 minutes. Go ahead and wrap up. What we're working on in the next minute or so. Thanks, yeah. So I won't ask you to share for today, but we will take some time on Friday to discuss some of the ways that we can make meetings go well, be involved in meetings effectively with each other. This is a good exercise for us because, again, I know meetings and talking about meetings be a little bit boring, but it's a good thing for us to do to make our experience go a lot better. So hopefully you'll find some of these pieces of advice useful as you think about your own meetings and the ways that you can help them go well. To wrap up for today, we talked about the sort of 3 different parts of group facilitation: prep, meeting at the time, and what we can do to follow up. We talked about creating a good and positive climate for everybody involved, and also talked about the range of challenges or issues that can come up as we're trying to facilitate work together in a meeting. Next class, we'll talk a little bit about how we can structure and use different rules and organizations to make meetings go well. Try to make it a little interesting. Have a great rest of your day. Again, after class, we'll try to go through and just make sure that everything is uploaded correctly for your essays. Sorry about that, that it hasn't been showing up. Great rest of your day. Please fast forward or email me your prompt, and I'll see you again for Friday. Yeah.